going on, members of the J Area? Of course, my name is Jose Ramos Jr. Welcome back to another edition of the J Area Wrestling Podcast. And I want to do something a little bit different here on the podcast. Obviously, if you're familiar with the podcast, if you're familiar with the YouTube channel, you know this is an opportunity to kind of rehash and reflect on what has occurred in the current state of professional wrestling. And obviously, we're going to do that first and foremost. We know that at the Royal Rumble event, February 1st, I know it's a little different. They're holding the Royal Rumble event in February rather than January. Something different. But nonetheless, aside from the Royal Rumble events that usually take place at the Royal Rumble event, we're going to have a ladder match to determine the true WWE champion. Cody Rhodes, who's been the champion since defeating Roman Reigns at WrestleMania 40, will be taking on his challenger, Kevin Owens, who in the last month has been parading around with the Winged Eagle Championship, proclaiming himself to be the rightful champion. I mean, in his own mind, he's become the WWE champion. He had the Phantom Call at Saturday night's main event where he claims that he got the victory, albeit there was no referee to make the official call. So in his own mind, in his own delusion, he believes he's the WWE champion. We knew following Saturday night's main event, we had our post-show reaction following the event itself. And the idea got thrown out there that quite possibly we would have a third matchup. The first matchup happened at Bash in Berlin. The second matchup happened at Saturday night's main event. And now the tiebreaker, the rubber match to determine the true WWE champion will be at the Royal Rumble. The idea of a ladder match got thrown out there. And I think it's a smart approach to take here for the WWE. No shenanigans should be taking place. It'll be definitive. You do not necessarily need a referee to determine the outcome of this matchup. No pinfall, no submission, no disqualification. Whoever is capable of climbing to the top of a ladder and unhooking seemingly two different titles, the WWE Championship and the Winged Eagle Championship, will be proclaimed the WWE champion. It's my favorite matchup. I've shared that here on this channel on occasion. Love a good Hell in a Cell match. Love a good street fight. But for me, there's nothing like a ladder match. I go all the way back to being a young fan, watching the likes of the Hardys, the Dudleys, and Edge and Christian battling it out in tables, ladders, and chairs. Again, if you're familiar with the content that I produce, I talk extensively about Rey Mysterio versus Eddie Guerrero at the 2005 edition of SummerSlam, obviously infamously known as the Custody of Dominic ladder match. It's my favorite. It's why I have this t-shirt on, Shawn Michaels, and that's what we're going to talk about here. A lot of times when it comes to the podcast, I enjoy talking about the daily events, the current events in professional wrestling, but being that the J Area and the YouTube channel itself is beginning to grow, we're building a little bit of traction here heading into 2025, and in large part thanks to you guys, the viewers, the members of the J Area, the dedicated fans of professional wrestling that continue to show up and show out for the videos that are produced here. We know on the live streams, that gives us a huge opportunity to connect, to talk about what is going on Monday Night Raw, Friday Night SmackDown. On occasion, we talk All Elite Wrestling. I personally have my own thoughts and opinions there, but the J Area really is predominantly WWE centered. So whenever the conversation comes to AEW, you guys let me know, and hey, we'll talk about it. So I wanted to do something a little bit different here with the episode of the J Area Wrestling Podcast and go on a little bit of a trip on memory lane here. We know that Cody Rhodes versus Kevin Owens will take place at the Royal Rumble in a ladder match. But something similar had occurred 30 years ago. The year's 1994, hence why we have the classic Shawn Michaels t-shirt. 1994, March to be exact, WrestleMania 10, Madison Square Garden. For the first time ever, the WWE held its ladder match on television. Now granted, they had a trial run behind the scenes on some dark matches, but for the first time ever on television, on pay-per-view no less, we were going to see a ladder match, and this would include the Heartbreak Kid Shawn Michaels against Scott Hall, aka Razor Ramon. A matchup that had quite some build to it. I mean, it was the fall of 93 that really the story started taking shape and was put in motion. During this time, Shawn Michaels had just recently broke away from the Rockers. Longtime partner Marty Jannetty and Shawn Michaels had split. It was the infamous barber shop moment where it was Brutus the Barber Beefcase hosting his show here, and he has two guests, one being Shawn Michaels, the other being Marty Jannetty, and what I think, quite frankly, is the most famous moment in the history of the barber shop. We have Shawn Michaels betraying Marty Jannetty, setting in motion again the pathways of two different superstars. Marty Jannetty would go on to not really have the best second half of his career. He dealt with a lot of personal issues and ultimately would find himself on the outside of the business trying to come back in. But his partner, Shawn Michaels, would go on to be one of the greatest wrestlers of all time, both in ring and outside, as people would consider him to be the Michael Jordan. Not my words, this is other people's words, but I mean, I'm a little biased. I'm a Shawn Michaels fan myself, but they would consider him to be one of the greatest of all time. Shawn Michaels would go on to have a Hall of Fame career, World Championships, WWE titles, Intercontinental title, tag titles, several matches of the year. But before he achieved any of those accolades, he had a heel run, accompanied with the likes of Sherry Martel, Sensational Sherry, as his manager. And it was with Sherry he developed this character, this new evolution to the character of Shawn Michaels that was the Heartbreak Kid. A dash of arrogance, a little bit of cockiness, and a lot of attention to detail when it came to his appearance. Shawn Michaels was trying to present himself in that old school heel where it's like the women loved him and the men loved to hate him. I mean, that was the approach the Heartbreak Kid took at that moment. And soon enough, he would find himself in the Intercontinental Championship title picture. He would have matches against the likes of the Mountie, obviously a guys like the British Bulldog. There was a time there with Bret Hart, albeit he was kind of already in the main event scene. But Shawn Michaels was the Intercontinental Champion. And at this point in time, well documented, the IC title was the Workman's title. It was the championship that was seen as the unofficial stepping stone for those who wanted to reach into the main event scene. Shawn Michaels was not only a great worker, but a star in the making. And around this time, there was a new star emerging. Razor Ramon, the bad guy, as he was called, clearly a take on Scarface. And if you know anything about Scott Hall, you know he's a big movie fan. He kind of pitched this idea of Razor Ramon, like I said, off of Scarface. Fun fact, he was also an instrumental part of pushing the Sting character in WCW, who was loosely inspired by the Crow. Clearly a lot of influence was taken from that, given the appearance, the characteristics, I mean, the makeup itself. I mean, come on. Scott Hall, a mind for the business. He started off as Razor Ramon, the bad guy, as we said. Building up momentum here. You know, he was already being associated with acts like The Ultimate Warrior, Randy Savage, Bret Hart, Ric Flair, but pretty soon he was put into the Intercontinental title picture. Now, like I said, we go back, it was the fall of 93. Shawn Michaels had to relinquish the title, the Intercontinental Championship. Behind the scenes, this is how the story goes. Apparently, Shawn Michaels had tested positive for PEDs, performance enhancing drugs. To this day, Shawn Michaels says he was not taking any. The fact that he came out positive is a mystery, supposedly. But he said he was not taking it. Regardless, Vince McMahon and the higher power relieved him of the Intercontinental Championship. They told him, we need the title back. Shawn Michaels, again, still holding firm to the belief that, hey, I didn't take any PEDs. But the fact is, it came out positive. Shawn Michaels doesn't want to give up the title. He says, well, you have to. Shawn Michaels off of TV, suspended. Technically the Intercontinental Champion. Never lost the title. Now, this is all happening behind the scenes, but on camera for you and I to be watching, this was when they held a battle royal, and ultimately, Razor Ramon would be crowned the Intercontinental Champion. Moments later, weeks have passed by. We're now in the spring of 94. We're approaching WrestleMania 10, the big show. I mean, WrestleMania at this point was growing. monumental matches happening at WrestleMania. The classic between Steamboat and Savage at WrestleMania 3, Andre getting slammed by Hogan, the title tournament at WrestleMania 4, the Ultimate Challenge at WrestleMania 6, each year seemingly becoming bigger and bigger. So how are we going to make WrestleMania 10 just as big? I tell you what you do. You take two of the up-and-coming stars, two of the stars for tomorrow, coming today, doing battle for the premier title of the Intercontinental Championship. You can already see where we're going with this. The parallels are there when it comes to the Cody Rhodes and Kevin Owens story, and obviously Michaels and Razor Ramon. Two champions, one unofficial, one the rightful championship. Put them in a ladder match. Suspend the titles above the ring and let the two battle it out. The stage was set. WrestleMania 10. Shawn Michaels and his supposed Intercontinental title versus Razor Ramon. And what would take place was a moment in history. Again, keep in mind, the year is 2024 now. We have seen countless ladder matches over the course of this 30-year span. We've seen it all. We've seen high-flying spots. We've seen dangerous stunts, drama beyond the imagination. But at this point in time in 94, it was still really a novel idea when it came to WWE audiences. We didn't know what to expect. Obviously, we understood that there was a ladder in place. To win the matchup, you had to climb the ladder. You had to retrieve the title, and that's how you would be named the victor. And the interesting thing is, looking back, the story goes they only had the one ladder. So imagine, again, the year's 94, imagine if Shawn and Razor use the ladder as a weapon or whatever the case may be, and something were to go haywire, and the ladder breaks. They have to now scramble to find a ladder from the back to utilize in this matchup. Things like that weren't really considered. I'm assuming someone like a stagehand was prepared in the back, but there was only one ladder in place for this matchup. Now, again, we talked about the build up to the matchup. I also forgot to mention that around this time, Shawn Michaels had a heater. He had a bodyguard by the name of Diesel. Kevin Nash, for those who are big Nitro fans. This was his introduction into the WWE. Had a big presence when it came to the build-up and, of course, the matchup itself. We watched the matchup, and Shawn and Razor immediately get into it, finding innovative ways to include the ladder. But the big story here, of course, is the presence of Big Daddy Cool Diesel. So what they do is they have Diesel become involved. Naturally, he's going to be there to help out his boss, to help out his buddy, the Heartbreak Kid. But then, immediately, the referee decides, you know what? We're not going to play this game. Sends Diesel to the back. Evicted from ringside. There goes the Big Diesel. Now it's a one-on-one contest. Now we get to see the innovative styles of Shawn Michaels and Razor Ramon, again, who are basically coming up with innovative spots here. The WWE never had a ladder match. They did have a trial run in 92, I believe, when it was Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels. But that wasn't aired on TV until years later when it was made public for the public consumption. Shawn Michaels and Razor Ramon finding new ways to use the ladder to their advantage. There were spots where they would hold it up as a weapon and bang it against the opponent. Sometimes we would see like a catapult where Shawn Michaels would be launched into the ladder match. We would see Razor Ramon heaving the ladder itself at Shawn Michaels, demonstrating a feat of strength that we did not know he was capable of at that point in time. But Shawn Michaels, ever so resilient, would find ways to stay in the matchup. I think the matchup itself really favored a guy like Shawn Michaels, who had the energy. He was the smaller opponent of the two, very elusive, so whenever the attack came his way and revolving around the ladder, he found ways to stick and move and find ways to be on the defensive. And then when the appropriate time arose, he was on the offensive. Obviously, you've seen the thumbnail, the classic spot where Shawn Michaels positions the ladder near the corner of the ring and takes the big splash. Now, a moment in time in history, and I really want to stop here for a moment because it really just demonstrates the change in eras. This generation, nowadays in 2024, everything is recorded. Everyone's using a cell phone, everyone's using some type of a device to capture this moment in time. But the one thing we really don't see anymore are the flashes. You go back to the 90s, whether it was this matchup, the Attitude Era, whatever the case may be, you go back in time and you can see so many flashes taking place because people are trying to capture it on film. They're trying to capture it in a photograph. So whenever we had these big spots, and again, we're using this one to be specific, the big splash from the corner, it really is remarkable to see just how much of a moment it was by the judging of all the flashes taking place by the audience. The matchup itself is an all-time classic, regarded as one of the greatest ladder matches of all time. That's why we decided to cover it here on the J Area podcast. It's a matchup that I think still holds up. If you're a younger fan, or perhaps a newer fan that is now coming into the WWE, coming into pro wrestling, I should say, and you go back and you watch this, maybe it's not your cup of tea because you've seen some of the high-flying action that takes place nowadays. But you have to keep in mind with the sense of this was innovative. This was something fresh. I'm a big movie fan. I'm a big movie buff when it comes to this kind of stuff. So I look at it in this perspective. As a horror fan, we've seen everything. We've seen slashers. We've seen psychological thrillers, whatever the case may be. But you go back in time to 1960, when a film like Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho came out. We've seen everything. We've become desensitized to a lot of the content that is produced in the media. But when you put on the lens of, wow, this was innovative for its time. It was the first time we got to see this certain spot or to see this sort of storytelling. It puts in perspective exactly how significant it was for its time. And then moving on to the finish itself, we know that Shawn Michaels is in position to win the matchup, but he's pushed over the ladder into the ropes and he becomes tangled in them for a moment there. And Ramon is able to scale up the ladder, climb up and retrieve not one but both Intercontinental titles. And it's still an image I think lasts even to this day, 30 years later. Shawn Michaels just barely becoming free from the ropes as he was tied from within, trying to reach over and grasp at the ladder as Razor begins to tug down on those titles, but it's too late. Razor, with the championships already in hand, declared the winner, and history was made. Shawn and Razor, what they were able to do in this matchup, set in motion a generation of talent. Guys like the Hardys, guys like Edge and Christian and the Dudleys, who we talked about already, and we will talk about them extensively as we move forward with the podcast and with this channel. But this ladder match, again, innovative for its time, does not get sung its praises enough. Shawn Michaels, one of the greatest of all time, and Razor Ramon, one of the more underrated talents that the WWE has ever had. To think about it, he was only with the company for about 4 years before leaving for WCW, maybe even under 4 years. So to think that they were able to have a lasting moment here, and what I think is one of the best matches from WrestleMania history, and that's saying something here, because this is the same WrestleMania event that had one of the greatest, if not the greatest, opener of all time between Owen and Bret Hart. Certainly a moment that lives in time. I think it should be considered as one of the greatest ladder matches of all time. I want you guys to comment down below your thoughts on the matchup, and if you haven't seen it, or haven't seen it in a long time, do yourself a favor, go out of your way, check it out again. WrestleMania 10, March of 1994. Shawn Michaels, Razor Ramon in the ladder match. An absolute classic. And then to think, moving forward, what it would do for both individuals. I mean, Razor Ramon obviously gets the rub here, gets the push as the Intercontinental Champion. Shawn Michaels demonstrating that, hey, he is that guy. He can have a solid matchup with anybody. This was one of his first big matches of the year. He would go on to have solid feuds against Diesel, would win the WWE title against Bret Hart at WrestleMania 12, Mind Games 96 with Mankind, The Undertaker matches, D-Generation X. I mean, Shawn Michaels goes down as one of the greatest of all time following this matchup. And then Razor Ramon, unfortunately, never was able to really achieve the top stardom. Never held a world title, whether it was WCW, WWE, never was able to climb Mount Everest and become a top guy. But that doesn't change the fact that both individuals have had a great significant influence on talent to this day, as well as for the future. This matchup itself, again, set in motion for what a ladder match could be. using the weapon that is the ladder match, using the drama of climbing up the ladder, and also just demonstrating how it was to incorporate it throughout the matchup, whether you were physically picking it up as a weapon of choice or using your opponent to slam into the ladder. A lot of bits and pieces have been taken from this match. I also look at other matches like the SummerSlam 98 match, which was The Rock and Triple H. That I feel like was the next evolution in the ladder match. And then you have WrestleMania 17, the TLC matchup that just puts it over the top. But at the heart of it all, this is where you start. We talk about possible matchups that you should introduce to newer wrestling fans, and I feel like this is definitely one of those. Shawn and Razor, just flat out ball when it comes out to this matchup. It still holds up to this day, and I think it's one that is certainly worth a watch. Will Cody Rhodes and Kevin Owens be able to live up to it? Will they be able to put their own spin on it? Possibly. Knowing what we know about Kevin Owens and Cody Rhodes, these are two of the consummate professionals when it comes to the industry to this day. Two guys who are very familiar with each other. I'm looking forward to the matchup. I'm hoping you guys are looking forward to the matchup because that'll make it all more interesting when it's time to sit down and talk pro wrestling, namely, of course, the Royal Rumble event. Real quick on a matter of the J Area podcast, I did want to take some time to talk about AEW Worlds End. We did not hold a live stream. We didn't do a reaction following the show due to scheduling. But the show itself, I thought, was a fitting end to an interesting year of All Elite Wrestling. All Elite Wrestling, kind of in a tumultuous time here when it comes to pro wrestling. A lot of fandom around it, surrounding it, whether it's a negative or positive. But I do have to say, the real MVP of AEW, and quite frankly, pro wrestling in general, having quite the year of 2024, I think is Will Ospreay. Had not one, but two fantastic matches. His match against Kyle Fletcher in the opener, fantastic. Fantastic. Goes on to the finals, faces off against Okada in what was their 6th meeting between the two of them. And again, builds off of what we've already known in the Continental Classic and what we've seen between these guys. And actually, I'll retract that statement. I don't think it's 6 times. I believe they said it was 8 or 9, if I'm not mistaken. But to see those two go at it in the finals, was it the right call to have Okada go over? Possibly. Between those two, I mean, Will Ospreay doesn't necessarily need it. He's going to go into the main event scene, fight for the world title fairly soon, I would imagine. I know there's a lot of people who have been saying that Kyle Fletcher would have definitely benefited from this tournament win, and I'd have to agree. You know, you look at a guy like Ricochet, who's just getting his heel turn going. So would it have benefited him? Possibly, but we see the direction they're going, and they're going to head towards a Swerve Strickland feud. I think that's the right move. Will Ospreay doesn't need it. He's the greatest, wrestler they have right now that's currently active, I think. Okada was a good option here, already building upon the legacy that he has as a tournament wrestler. But a guy like Kyle Fletcher could have definitely benefited from this win, putting him over the top, having him against Okada. Because the thing is with that tournament, they made some changes to it. They changed it in that it was not a gold final and a blue final to lead to the actual finals. For some reason, we had the runner-ups in one tournament bracket and then the other winners in the other. I don't know. It was weird. The way they set it up, they made a change. I don't like it. I'm not a fan of it. But whatever. I'm not booking it. I'm just watching it. I'm a fan. We're all fans just watching to give our perspective and our analysis and our critiques on pro wrestling itself. Nonetheless, Kyle Fletcher I thought would have been a solid pick. They didn't go that route, so I'm interested to see where we go moving forward regarding Kyle Fletcher. Now, at the end of his matchup with Will Ospreay, there was a little bit of a hint at what we could see down the line. Will Ospreay, looking at Kyle Fletcher following his victory, held up 2 fingers to signify one-on-one. You won at Full Gear. I won here at Worlds End. We're going to get the rubber match. Now, if you were to ignore the fact that earlier in 2024, they did have a matchup, for the sake of this feud, we'll ignore that because the actual feud, as it currently stands, I suppose is 1 versus 1. So look for that matchup. We're going to get some kind of rematch, some kind of um, opportunity to do a rubber match there. But AEW, other than that, a solid show. I think those matchups in the Continental Classic for sure stole the show. The main event itself. Let's talk about it. Orange Cassidy, Jay White, and Hangman Adam Page. They were the challengers in a four-way matchup against champion Jon Moxley, in a matchup that I think we all knew was going to be overbooked. It was going to have interference. We saw the Death Riders often and early, which I think is, probably the right call because logically it makes sense. I personally think the matchup could have been kicked into another gear. That's just my own liking, but I do think the call of having Moxley going over was the right call. I'm a fan of Jay White. I'm a fan of Adam Page. Orange Cassidy's pretty cool. But I don't think Moxley drops it to any of them. I still hold firm, as I'm sure many of you who also watch All Elite Wrestling hold firm, that the guy that should dethrone Jon Moxley and defeat the Death Riders has to be Darby Allin. Has to be Darby Allin. We alluded to Sting earlier, talking about Scott Hall and his, influence on that character building, but Sting's influence on Darby Allin cannot be denied. He's the clear face of this company. He should be the guy who is defending AEW from the Death Riders. If they do not have him go over, that's a mistake. That's a huge mistake. And now, with the return of Adam Copeland at the end of the show, which, big shout out to Adam Copeland. Love Edge. Him teaming up with FTR, cool. And I think it's signifying that we're going to get Adam Copeland against Jon Moxley, probably for the title fairly soon. I don't think Copeland should be the winner. I don't think he should face him, or I don't think he should beat him. Let's say that. But then you have Christian, who has the contract that enables him to cash in, essentially, at any time of his choosing to become the world champion, essentially, a la the Money in the Bank, which Adam Copeland knows very well. So we have that thrown into it as well. That's my fear, is that for the sake of the feud between Adam and Christian Cage, we're going to get Adam the world title, Christian Cage cashes in, they lead off with their feud. That's a possibility. But I really think Darby Allin should be the guy. Darby Allin should win this matchup. He should be the one to dethrone Jon Moxley and become the face of the company, essentially. Everyone loves Darby. This guy has a Jeff Hardy quality to him where he throws his body into these perilous moments. This guy does not care. He's a daredevil. If this guy's able to walk within the next 15 years, that's a huge win. Because the amount of punishment that he puts himself through, unimaginable. Unimaginable. How can he withstand it? Darby Allin's a world champion for AEW, for sure. I want that to happen. I need that to happen. But nonetheless, we're going to keep up with AEW. We're going to keep watching the show and see how it moves forward. They have a huge deal. Obviously, if you haven't heard about it, Max now streaming with AEW. It seems that they're going to have the rights to their content, whether it's previous and the older episodes of Dynamite. Hopefully also access to the older pay-per-views that AEW has already put out there. Quality stuff, I must say. Say what you will about their product in terms of the television, but when it comes to pay-per-view matches, AEW can deliver. And as a segue, not only are they the ones with a huge streaming deal, but hey, Netflix, Monday Night Raw. Monday Night Raw. Tonight's episode of Monday Night Raw will be the final episode on TV, essentially, because they're going to go for the next 10 years to Netflix. It's a huge show here tonight. I'm imagining we're going to get some kind of huge ending, some kind of, big hook that should lead you into next week's episode of Monday Night Raw, which, of course, Intuit Dome, Los Angeles. We're going to have a few huge matches, just in case you haven't heard. The last, I believe it was hinted, I don't know if it's official, but there was a last women's standing matchup between Liv Morgan and Rhea Ripley for that world title. We know that CM Punk versus Seth Rollins will take place, and also Roman Reigns against Solo Sikoa for the right to call themselves the Tribal Chief. It's going to be a huge show. A phenomenal show. I'm looking forward to it. I know you guys are looking forward to it, because if you're watching this deep into the episode, that's how I know that you're a real one. So if you guys are watching this far into the episode, make sure you comment down below and talk about how you are a real one here in the J area. Appreciate you guys always showing up, showing out for the content that is produced here on YouTube, continuing to grow, continuing to make huge strides here on YouTube. And we have a lot of things planned. I don't want to get ahead of myself here. We have a lot of things planned. Big year in 2025. You guys have made 2024 such a monumental year when it came to the growth of the J area, when it came to the growth of developing a community of professional wrestling fans here. Can't thank you guys enough, and I'm hoping, if you guys allow me to, hoping to continue to entertain you guys, hoping to continue to talk pro wrestling with all of you. So I appreciate you guys stopping by here for the J Area Wrestling Podcast. Something different. Got to talk about the past. Shawn Michaels versus Razor Ramon, one of my favorite matches of all time, while also referencing the future of professional wrestling, whether it's WWE on Netflix, AEW on Max. Make sure you comment down below, what are you looking most forward to in the year 2025 as a pro wrestling fan? Who were some of your favorites in 2024? Drop down in the comments some of your favorite moments, some of your favorite matches. Make sure, if you haven't already, to like the episode. That way we know that we're doing something right here in the J area. Comment down below, as I mentioned, share the episode, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. Join the team, join the family that is the J area as we continue to grow as a family, as a community. Because without this, it would not be possible without your guys' support. So make sure you subscribe, you keep up to date with all the pro wrestling content that is produced here on the channel. Of course, my name is Ramos Jr. Thank you guys again for joining me on today's episode of the J Area Wrestling Podcast. Make sure to tune in for tonight's live stream following Monday Night Raw. With that being said, I'll see you guys then, and make sure to always stay cool.